In the final mini lecture, we'll continue our discussion of McDonaldization by looking at the ways in which the principles of McDonaldization impact the various products that we use in our daily lives, as well as our roles as employees as well as consumers. On the surface, McDonaldization may seem like a phenomenon of the West, but if we look at the various principles of efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control, we can see how they're embedded within multiple aspects of our global society. Consider the reading by Springer on the gender advisors in Africa and the importance of calculability in those individuals' experiences, or the importance of efficiency in the recycling plants that were explored in the film Plastic China. Efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control have had a huge impact on the way in which people all over the world live and interact with each other. And we'll explore this more in this final mini lecture. In the McDonaldized world, there has to be what I call a system in place. This system brings together the product, the employee, and the consumer in a larger structure. Now, Ritzer does not specifically use the word system or systems in the McDonaldization of society. However, I believe it's necessary to acknowledge that McDonaldization creates a unique environment where the product is different than if it existed outside of a McDonaldized world. For example, a hamburger in McDonald's is different than a hamburger that you would make at home or get in a fine dining restaurant. In the same way, we need to acknowledge that employees working in a McDonaldized world do not work for themselves, but on behalf of a larger structure, and that consumers understand the limits of a McDonaldized society and act within those limits. So each of these actors are part of a McDonaldized system: the product, the employee, and the consumer. And each of them are impacted by the forces or principles of McDonaldization: efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control. And they also reinforce these dimensions, although in very different ways. When talking about these systems or the sites of McDonaldization, it's sometimes helpful to think of them as rational structures, which are largely the site of consumption. Now, these rational structures don't necessarily need to be in physical spaces. Today, we've actually seen a shift from the brick and mortar systems of the past to digital systems, where people interact online using technologies. Of course, we still have solid systems like the brick and mortar McDonald's that you can walk into, but we also have digital systems like Amazon and increasingly more hybrid systems such as Walmart that operate in both physical and digital spaces. The recent COVID pandemic has pushed many of us into the digital space. For example, we can see this even outside the realm of consumption. In, for example, the classes offered at SUNY Brockport. This class is 100% online, so the system operates within a digital space. We're also seeing an increase in movement to digital spaces in areas such as healthcare. Now, obviously, brick and mortar systems are those solid physical structures. You can walk into them. But in contrast, digital systems can be considered liquid. People often find these systems less constricting. They enjoy the freedom of liquid societies. In fact, some people have argued that we've moved into what's known as liquid modernity. Liquid modern is a society in which the conditions under which members act changes faster than the way of acting to consolidate into habits or routines. In other words, society moves so quickly that it's almost impossible for us to adapt to it. Regardless if a system is liquid or solid, in a McDonaldized society, products, employees, and consumers are all shaped by the principles of efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control. To look at the ways in which products are shaped by the principles of McDonaldization, we can look at cell phones. Today, everyone has a mobile device, and some of us have multiple mobile devices. These phones are incredibly efficient, given that they're updated so often that we're always finding the optimum method for getting information and communicating with others. If you look at the phones of just 5 or 10 years ago, they seem almost obsolete for the kinds of tasks that we need to do today. Phones are also incredibly calculable, and if you've ever had to go shopping for a new phone, you can see this. Different phone companies focus on specs, such as size, price, weight, display, and all of these are embedded within the advertising related to different devices. Phones are also incredibly predictable because even though they're constantly being updated and evolving, they're still incredibly familiar. You might need a little bit of guidance on new features, but you don't need to read a whole instruction manual every time you get a new device. And in addition, we can see that the products that we use in a McDonaldized society are also controlled. In terms of our cell phones, we know that if a phone gets locked, it's almost impossible to get it unlocked. Given that most people are an employee at some point in their lives, thinking about the ways in which the principles of McDonaldization impact employees is important. Labor is often divided into very specific tasks that make the whole process efficient. We know at McDonald's, one person takes care of the hamburgers and someone else manages the fries. But you can see this in other aspects of the world as well. For example, I teach sociology at SUNY Brockport, but there are other professors that teach biology, chemistry, English, history, etc. Each of us has a very specific task, which coming together create the experience of SUNY Brockport. We also know that employers use elements of calculability to evaluate their employees. In some jobs, you have to take a test before you can start working, and in other jobs, you're evaluated on a scale. For example, after you contact a utility company or credit card company, you might be asked to complete a survey about your customer experience. Employees often find that they're in a very predictable situation too. In fact, when you answer an employment ad, you have a pretty good idea of what the job will entail. If you've ever done reception work or had to answer the phone at your employer, you might recognize the following. Thank you for calling SUNY Brockport. My name is Heidi. How may I help you? It's a predictable script, and both the employee and the caller know how it will play out. We also know that most workplaces are systems with innumerable rules, regulations, guidelines, lines of command, and hierarchies. Employees have files, and in some places they even have to clock in. Employees often have to follow a script, which, as we mentioned, creates predictability, but it also controls the employee's interaction with the customer. Customers work very hard in a McDonaldized society. In fact, customers do a large part of the work that used to be done by employees. Part of the reason that McDonaldized systems are so efficient is because the customer does so much work. Some folks refer to customers today as prosumers because they combine elements of being both a producer and a consumer. Now, the tasks that customers do often seem trivial, especially on digital sites. But consider that in the past, if you wanted to travel, you would go to a travel agent who would compare prices for different hotels, flights, car rentals, etc. Today, people just use Expedia or Kayak to find different hotels, flights, car rentals, and do the comparison themselves. Calculability also guides multiple aspects of a consumer's life. We often use star rating systems on Yelp or Amazon to find new restaurants, purchase a toothbrush, decide what we want to watch on Netflix, or even select a college or university. We're also trained by the system to act in predictable ways. Think about what happens when someone cuts in line at a restaurant, or if somebody asks for something that's not on the menu. Can you imagine the response if someone in line at McDonald's asked for a lobster? Of course, this means that there has to be an element of control. And control is seen in multiple ways, from the lines we stand in, to the ways in which we respond when asked what we would like to order, and to the various ways that we even clean up after ourselves when leaving a McDonaldized establishment. When was the last time you went to a fast food restaurant and saw someone leave all their trash on the table without eliciting some kind of response from either those working in the establishment or other customers? It would be difficult for a person to argue that they're not impacted by the elements of McDonaldization today. In fact, all over the world, individuals' lives are shaped by various elements of efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control. It's become part of our culture. In thinking about the ways in which culture impacts individuals, Max Weber argued in the late 19th and early 20th century that the Protestant work ethic and spirit of capitalism created iron cages for individuals of that time. In thinking about McDonaldization, we can see the cage analogy again. Of course, given the benefits of McDonaldization, some people believe that we actually live in a velvet rather than iron cage. Of course, by understanding the various elements of McDonaldization and how it impacts our lives, we can move from an iron or velvet cage into maybe a more rubber cage, where we're aware of the elements of McDonaldization and look for moments where we can move beyond them.